mit der Akzeptanz der vier Grundfreiheiten und dazu gehört auch die Freizügigkeit der Personen. Brexit means Brexit.
Hello and welcome to another Brexitometer brought to you by the Martin Center. We're joining you after a few weeks of relative quiet on the Brexit front and also a few days of absolute chaos in London as the UK and the EU are scrambling to reach a deal before the end of the year and to avoid a chaotic no-deal Brexit in March 2019. Now, you may have heard that the EU Council of last week in Brussels was supposed to be when the two sides would seal the deal and basically find the way towards an agreement that would be formalized in a summit, in a special Brexit summit in November. Instead, there was no agreement in Brussels. There will probably be no special summit in November. And right now, December looks like the absolute final deadline for an agreement to be reached so that it will be validated, ratified on time before March 2019. Otherwise, it's a no-deal Brexit and all the chaos that comes with it. Now, both sides have admitted that most aspects of the deal are in place, but the points of disagreement are so serious that the whole thing can come crashing down and basically there will be no agreements. So basically, what are the things that can make or break a deal in the following weeks as negotiations continue? The Brexitometer has you covered, and we will present to you today the three words that will be in everyone's mouth during negotiations leading up to the final deal, if there is one. So welcome to the Brexit lexicon, or the Brexicon if you like, of the coming 2 months. The first word in everyone's mouth, the word that everybody's talking about in London right now, and it's on all newspapers, and it's actually very technical, and a lot of people don't actually have a hard time understanding what it means, is the so-called backstop. The backstop for Northern Ireland. The backstop is basically the status under which Northern Ireland will remain part of EU structures, the customs union, and perhaps aspects of the single market after Brexit, in order to avoid the creation of a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. The idea is that we have to keep the border between the two parts of Ireland as open as possible in order to avoid creating the conditions that would lead again to confrontation and perhaps conflict between the two sides as it used to be until the 1990s, and a peace deal that was reached there. Now, both sides, the UK and the EU, recognize that something needs to be done about Northern Ireland so that there will be no hard border between the two sides. Theresa May has offered for the UK to remain in a customs union with the EU for a specific period of time, during which the UK and the EU will figure out how to trade over the Irish border without creating obvious checks and controls. So this is basically the meaning of the backstop. Until the two sides develop a way to have trade without any checks and controls, this is a temporary period during which Northern Ireland will remain part of the EU structures. But the problem is how to do this. The UK would like, obviously, the backstop to be time limited, only for a certain time period, and it also does want to create a different status for Northern Ireland and a different status for the rest of the UK. And this is very, very important for the DUP, the Unionist Party that supports Theresa May's government in Westminster. So Theresa May has basically suggested that the whole of the UK remain in some kind of customs union with the rest of the EU during this backstop period. The EU, on the other hand, would prefer only Northern Ireland to remain within the backstop, to remain within the structures of the EU, and we would also like for this backstop to be open-ended, so there would be no specific end to it agreed. It would just remain in place until the two sides find a way to trade over the border of Ireland without apparent checks checks and controls. Now the problem for Theresa May is that she cannot accept an open-ended backstop, because then the Eurosceptic right-wing wing of its Conservative Party will think that this is basically an open-ended deal that would keep Northern Ireland, or perhaps the whole of the UK, as a de facto part of the EU for a longer period of time. It's a very technical stuff, but you have to understand it's also very, very political, because it basically creates conflicting expectations on Theresa May from the Irish Unionists, from the Eurosceptic wing of the Conservative Party, and from the rest of the political system that expects an agreement. The next weeks will be devoted primarily to negotiating the backstop, to negotiating the status of Northern Ireland after Brexit. It really all boils down to the Irish border, and depending which way it goes, it can sink or save Brexit and Theresa May's government. The second word that made an appearance last week, but will keep us busy probably in the future, in the next couple of months, is extension or Brextension. An extension of the transition period, but perhaps also an extension of the UK's exit date. We will see. Now remember, UK and the EU have agreed on a transition period after the UK's exit from the EU until the end of 2020. That's a little bit less than 2 years after formal Brexit. In this transition period, EU laws and rules will apply to the UK as if the UK were a member. But the transition will come into force only if the two sides reach a complete agreement before March 2019. If they don't, there is no extension. If there is no deal, that's hard Brexit from day one, from 30th of March 2019. Now, the discussion about extension of the transition period, perhaps up to a year, shows that both sides need more time. One reason they need more time is the topic that we just discussed, the backstop. Remember, the backstop, the different status of Northern Ireland, will come into action if the UK cannot develop its own technological ideas to ensure free trade between the two sides of Ireland. So basically, if you extend the transition period for 1 more year, you create more time for solutions to be found for trade to take place between the two parts of Ireland, and therefore you may not need the backstop at all. So it's a way to solve the backstop problem as well. A second, more important reason why you might need an extension is negotiating the future trade relationship between the UK and the EU. Trade deals, international trade deals, are very, very complicated things, and they normally take years, sometimes even decades to conclude. Concluding a comprehensive trade deal agreement between the UK and the EU in 21 months, everyone knows that was never really going to happen. So perhaps you need an extension of the transition period for 1 more year to actually reach an agreement. So the EU itself actually looks quite ready to consider extending the transition period for a year. And there have already been some voices in London that say, hey, if we're actually extending the transition period for a year, why don't we actually extend Brexit itself for a year? It will just be simpler, and it might even be better for the UK to actually not spend 3 years as a de facto member of the EU without having any voice though in how the EU is run, but actually extend the time during which the UK will be part of the EU. Now the reactions are quite predictable. The hard Eurosceptic wing of the Conservative Party doesn't like the idea of yet another extension. Remember, it's been already 2 years since the Brexit referendum in 2016. By the time the transition is over, it's going to be almost 4 years. It's going to be more than 4 years since the referendum took place. They're afraid that if you add postponement upon postponement and extension upon extension, basically Brexit is never going to happen. But watch this space. If negotiations over Ireland get stuck in the next week, then extension may be the only way to avoid a no-deal Brexit. The third word in the Brexicon that has been in use for some time now, but will probably end up providing a solution to all of our Brexit problems, is fudge. It's a word that in English it means a soft, sugary candy, but it's also a metaphor where we mean a compromise. A compromise, though, that allows everyone to agree on something, but it also leaves space for interpretation and for the different sides to take away from the compromise what they think is better for them. So what kind of fudge would Theresa May need to get her deal through Parliament? Remember, she basically needs something that will satisfy both hard Eurosceptics and unionists in her government, and also parts of the pro-EU opposition and British public opinion in general. She would basically need to find a wording to the agreement that will satisfy all sides. So what will happen is that probably Theresa May knows that if she's to reach an agreement, she needs to make compromises. The UK was going to have to make more compromises than the EU. What she really needs from the EU is some nice words. She could agree to a declaration that the EU will do all it can after the transition to ensure that no hard border is created in Ireland, and therefore the backstop may never be put in use, may never be needed. But she would also need a declaration from the EU, an outline of future relations that points, for example, to an ambitious and deep and comprehensive future trade agreement that will be beneficial to the EU economy. Now, if all this sounds murky and is just promises, well, that's basically what it is. If the EU and the UK are to come to an agreement by March 2019, that's probably not going to be the end of it. Negotiations will continue for the future relationship during the transition period and perhaps beyond. Theresa May needs a package that will allow her to provide a generous interpretation of the deal for her domestic audience. A fudge. She will need a lot of legalistic language, a lot of different protocols, a lot of different, perhaps even interpretations of aspects of the future agreement, anything to help her and her government to get through the line to avoid a no-deal Brexit by March 2019. Now, the problem is the EU willing to allow the UK to leave without every aspect of the future relationship agreed and cast in stone? For the EU, the problem is that once the UK is out, and if not everything is agreed in perfect detail, there might be problems down the way as the UK may make future demands. We will just have to wait and see. At this point, though, it is Theresa May that really needs the help from the EU in order to create some kind of fudge that will be sellable to her parliament and to her public opinion. So this was another episode of the Brexitometer, where we examined the three key words in the Brexit lexicon, backstop, extension, and fudge. These three words will help us get through the line if we are to avoid a no-deal hard Brexit by March 2019. And you are well prepared, thanks to the Brexitometer, to follow and hopefully understand the complicated, technical and manic negotiations of the coming weeks. As always, Brexitometer will be here. We're going to have more frequent episodes in the next couple of months to guide you through these last few days of an agonizing negotiation. I'm sure you're not bored of it yet. Now the exciting part is only just getting started. As always, we are ready. We're here to answer your questions. So you can always send us your questions on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram using the hashtag Brexitometer. Until next time, take care. Before we go, one last word on a personal and sad note. If you follow the Martin Center online and on social media, you will probably have learned about the untimely death a few weeks ago of José Luis Fontalbán. When it comes to the Brexitometer, José Luis was actually the person who conceived of the idea of the Brexitometer. He even came up with the name Brexitometer. He's a person who thought about me, talked to me about it, and believed in me, and even convinced me to do it, because at the beginning I was a bit hesitant about doing it. But that was José Luis. He was always an enthusiastic and encouraging person, always ready to inspire the people around him with new ideas. Throughout these past 2 years, he, as well me and everyone and all of you watching us, have seen the Brexitometer grow and succeed, I think. But that is really just one more validation of the amazing imagination, inspiration, and vision José Luis had about how social media, digital media, could be used to inform people about European affairs and EU politics. We will really miss José Luis. His leadership will really be missed in the Martin Center and also in the Brexitometer. The least I can do is to dedicate this episode of the Brexitometer to his memory. Goodbye, José Luis.